Recording. So just a couple things. My name is Chris Price. I'm the Academic Programs Manager for the SUNY Center for Professional Development. And this webinar today is being sponsored by the SUNY Faculty Development Community of Practice. That group, many of you may have heard of this webinar today through that group, which lives in Workplace. But if you heard about it elsewhere, I'm just going to pop in the chat as well the link to our group in Workplace. It's an open group, so anyone can join if you're in Workplace, and you could just use your campus ID and email if you're not to get in there. And so this is the first of two. There will be another webinar April 14th on unbundling the course design process with a team-based approach. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, I'm going to put the link in there so you can sign up for that if you'd like to attend that. That one again is taking place April 14th, later in the day. That one is going to be 1:30 to 2:30 on April 14th. And the other thing I wanted to do is just to get these out of the way is let you know that our community of practice in SUNY will have a conference, and actually that conference will be on Dakin's home campus of SUNY Cortland, October 19th and 20th. So, hopefully this current crisis will be well behind us and conferences won't be canceled left and right. But we do have the call for proposals out now for that conference. So if you're interested in presenting about what you're doing related to faculty development and student success, which is the theme, please consider submitting a proposal. We'll be accepting proposals until April 20th. Okay. So Dakin said he will be definitely taking questions. If you have questions, feel free to put the questions in the chat. You can also use your microphone to ask a question at the appropriate time. But if you want to put your question in there and get in the queue, feel free to do that anytime, and I'll be monitoring that. I'd also ask that you just keep your microphone muted, just so that we don't get any cross noise. And so I just want to thank again Dakin Burdick, the Director of the Institute for College Teaching, for agreeing to present today on building inclusion and trust through discussion protocols. So I'm going to mute my mic and take it away, Dakin.
Okay, well, thank you. Welcome, everyone. We'll just go ahead and get started here. So the things I'm going to talk about today are, first of all, what causes student anxiety, then talk about scaffolding or prioritizing a response based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, then talking about being aware of social anxiety and what learning differences can exacerbate the kinds of student anxiety we run into. There'll be a spokesperson exercise in the middle, and then I'm going to really get into talking about what are the small group discussion protocols that one can use, especially in small classes. And I'll also offer a couple discussion protocols for large classes. And at the end of this, should we have time, we'll talk a little bit about reducing student anxiety online, which is kind of a timely issue for us here at SUNY. And as Chris was saying, if there's questions along the way, please just post them in chat, and Chris will bring them up to me, and then we'll address them then. It's just better than waiting till the end when we've kind of forgotten about what we would just said. So in terms of student anxiety, we pretty much know all of this. It's anxiety is created when you have an unfamiliar environment, when you're removed from your support structure, when you're isolated from your colleagues, and these days with an uncertain job market, it becomes even worse. So all of this stuff is things that apply to students and to all of our students. All of our students are anxious in some way because when they come to college, their environment changes dramatically. They have to make all new sets of friends. They are in a new place. Some of them have never left their hometown before, and so there's a huge amount of stress on them. And today's job market and COVID-19 and everything else doesn't make that any easier. So we have to kind of be conscious of that. At the same time, anxiety is not a bad thing per se, because mid-range anxiety correlates to higher student performance. If students are worried about their courses, they tend to study more, they tend to prepare more, and they tend to do better. If they have high or low levels of anxiety, that can correlate to poorer student performance. If they have high anxiety, maybe they just shut down or they drop out. If they have low anxiety, maybe they don't do the work they need to do to get the grades that they would like. Anxiety is also negatively related to student persistence, which is why the administration is very interested in this. England in 2019 did this study, and he noted that a third of the biology majors in the freshman biology class decided to leave the major. So if you've got a lot of too much anxiety within a major, and you're going to see a lot of that, of course, in the sciences and anything that seems hard at the start, you're going to get a lot of people dropping out, and that's not what you want. You want to recruit people in that first year, so you're trying to reduce the level of anxiety they're feeling. Certainly, we don't want to exacerbate it. I do recall years ago when I was working with the medical school, I was reading in academic medicine, and one of the articles they had said, we should reduce the amount of abuse that we give our medical students. It wasn't a matter of eliminating the abuse, it was a matter of reducing it. And I'm going to argue that you should just eliminate that abuse. They don't need to toughen up. They don't need to develop grit. They need support. Now, anxiety is also higher in first-year students, as I've just mentioned, but it's also higher in underrepresented populations. And we could talk about a number of groups that maybe have more anxiety than others, right? And I think when we do that, we're going to jump automatically to groups like ADHD or ASD, something like that. But those are actually really small percentages of the population. The largest group of the population that we're dealing with will be underrepresented population. So in terms of African Americans and Latinos, those are the groups that are going to be under the most stress and that are the most present in our classes. Those are the ones that really should be our first go-to if we're talking about perhaps culturally responsive teaching. Addressing those populations and their needs is of prime importance. Now, the next group down will be dyslexics. There's 20% of the population are dyslexic, so that's going to be 1/5 of your population in the class. And so you should keep in mind some of their needs. And then moving down, ADHD is 5% of the population. And then the ASD, which is the autistic spectrum disorder, is only 2% of the population, but you're going to have mixed groups in there as well. So we need to be conscious of all of our students and not just generalize to some norm that we think this is what students should be like, because they're not. They're all very, very different. So here's an example of social anxiety at its worst. So this is Sarah Kavanaugh. She's now a pretty popular speaker, and she does keynotes everywhere. But back in her college days, she would have panic attacks that were all-encompassing and utterly incapacitating. And she talks about it here. This hit every single biological system in her body. She would be laying on the bathroom, lying on the floor, sick to her stomach, feeling the cool tile against her forehead. This was a pretty major response for her. And she did overcome it. And the way she overcame it was that her professors insisted she participate. 1/3 of her grade was awarded on the basis of participation. And so, as she says it, such pronouncements pit my anxiety against my nerdy pride, and pride won. So she was in, thank goodness, a safe environment where she could practice these skills with relatively little risk. She was supported by her faculty members. That was good. And she personally took action and worked through the kinds of pain that she had to. Now, not everybody can do that as well, but Sarah succeeded, and Sarah succeeded brilliantly. So she overcame a lot of these things. And so this controlled exposure in a safe setting is another thing that we need to think about in terms of reducing anxiety and giving support, that sort of piece. The other piece that I can't overemphasize enough is faculty-student relationships matter. Student anxiety increases when a faculty member rates low on immediacy, clarity, or communication skills. And I've had this conversation so many times over the last 20 years. A lot of faculty, well, I wouldn't say a lot, maybe a third, quarter, feel that it's their duty to provide the content, and that it is not their duty to establish a close relationship with their students. I personally have worked at a number of small colleges, and at small colleges, it is definitely your duty to make close connections with the students. The story that comes to me is when I moved from Indiana, where I worked at Indiana University, I moved to a small college in Massachusetts. I am used to having 1,000 students per semester. And at the end of that year, at that semester, I just boot all of their names because I'm never going to see them again. And at the small college, I did that. And the very next day, I saw them all in the food line at the cafeteria. And I didn't remember their names because I was used to getting rid of them. And so that was a good reminder for me that I need to stay in touch with my students, know who they are, and make connections. And the faculty that were doing the best job in supporting the colleges were those that were going to the sports games. They were helping with student clubs. They knew each of these students individually. They would help them out and take a lot of extra time to work with them. So faculty-student relationships matter. Next, we can talk about how do we prioritize the level of support we give to them. So we're saying that we want to give support to these students. What are the kinds of support we need to give? Well, first, if we're looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he starts off with physiological needs. So adequate housing, food security, allergy-friendly environment, and the rest. And then works his way up. So safety would be the next one, protection from harassment or violence. Then love and belonging, then esteem, and then self-actualization. And we can use those as ways of prioritizing the kind of support we're giving. So a lot of us may go immediately to love and belonging, that we want to develop the sense of belonging that aids student retention. But we have to remember that there's 2 levels before that we have to ensure that they feel safe in the classroom, that they feel safe on campus, that they have adequate food, that sort of thing, that they have affordable textbooks. So affordable textbooks, we can start talking about open educational resources. We have to have ADA compliance for disability issues. All of these have to be covered before you get to that love and belonging that I think is more familiar to us as faculty. Now, today's session is about small group work and about discussion protocols in general. And it's that because I really am a big, strong believer in this, that I think it can reduce anxiety. First of all, it reduces social anxiety by decreasing the level of risk. If you have the 5 usual suspects in a class that are always talking, and you break that class up, you can get those people that never talk to talk in those small groups. And when they're talking in those small groups, they're building their confidence because they're encountering other students and they're learning they're not the only ones that don't understand something, or perhaps they learn that they actually have something to contribute that maybe the others didn't. In addition, when you're randomizing those small groups frequently, which is another thing I recommend, that ensures that the class members know each other. So by the end of the semester, everybody in the class knows each other, and hopefully that builds trust and reduces a sense of risk. It gets them to take chances, which will build creativity, and it will actually be a much more rewarding class for you as the instructor as well. Small groups can give more students a voice, hopefully give all students a voice, although that may take a lot of support by the faculty member to ensure that. And students can be also involved in content selection and assignment choices, things that make the assignments more relevant for themselves, and therefore they spend more time on it, they work harder on it. And of course, with any small group the learning has to be meaningful. It can't be busy work. And the instructor must check for misperceptions afterwards. So are there any questions up to this point?
I don't see any in the chat. Does anybody have any questions? It's a small group, so feel free to jump in if you want to just ask something now.
Well, I'm going to move on because we'll have lots of time to talk.
Okay.
But as soon as somebody has a question, just let us know. So first thing is kind of the UDL response, Universal Design for Learning. What reduces everyone's anxiety? So there's 2 things I would recommend here. One is class organization. A well-organized class is also highly correlated to higher student evaluations, which are essentially student satisfaction polls. So organization is a good thing. Chunk your content so it makes sense and so it's easy to pick up. Use a lot of low-risk assignments and assessments rather than a few high-risk ones. That helps them keep up to date with their assignments, so they're doing the assignments they need to do rather than waiting for the day before the midterm and studying and doing poorly. There's a much stronger training period there. You could offer rubrics and make grading more transparent so they know what to expect. And Generally, if you tell them what you want, they're more likely to give you it. Establish classroom routines so that they feel comfortable, they know what it is you're using. So in terms of small group work or discussion protocols, I usually tell people, you pick maybe 3 to 5 discussion protocols to use in the semester. Don't be switching up every week, because that can be, you'll be spending more time teaching them the new protocol than actually working on the content. And you build up this cognitive overload that's just not helpful. I have no pop quizzes here, because the people who are going to do well on pop quizzes are the people that are going to do well at everything. They're the top students. The bottom students are not going to do well on pop quizzes. They won't see them coming. They'll be blindsided by them. And then that will build this learned helplessness in them, where they won't even bother anymore because they figure they'll never do well on them. So I just say no pop quizzes. And then be prepared to teach social and technical skills that the students will need above and beyond your content. Don't think that they're millennials and therefore they know how to do computer things. I think this is a cliche now, that our students really don't. Our students are very good at using smartphones. And so if you're using smartphones in class, great. But if you're using Word or you're using Office, they're not as good with that, and they're not very good typists. So a lot of the skills that we had, or I had, 20, 30 years back, are not there anymore. And so we have to be sure to teach those. And social skills probably are something that also could use some help as well. Again, I talk about building a sense of community. That's community not just between faculty and students, but students to students, building that trust. And so I recommend using icebreakers to start doing that at the beginning of a class, to begin building community, and then continue that throughout the semester, so that, again, you're reducing the level of risk, you're reducing anxiety. All right, with that, I have a job for you. So this is a spokesperson exercise, and I'd like you to act as a disciplinary expert. Think about your discipline, and then as a spokesperson for that discipline, discuss how you balance student support with rigor in your field, and why you choose that way to balance that. And do this in the chat box, and then hopefully that will generate some thoughts, and we can come back to that. Yeah, sure, Mele. The activity is act as a disciplinary expert in your field, and frame that broadly as a sciences or humanities or patient care or something. And then talk about how you balance student support with rigor. That's kind of the part of the balancing act we all have to do. So how do you do it? What support do you give your students? And where do you draw the line? Where do you enhance the rigor in the course? Yeah, this looks great. There's a lot of fantastic responses here. I'm really glad to see all of this. Mele, it sounds like you've got a situation you wanted to describe. Um, would you mind talking about it with us?
Hi, sorry, I'm doing this on my phone while I'm pumping gas. Uh, so I am currently teaching at a community college, SUNY, and I am a very new adjunct professor. I came in with very high expectations of the difference between secondary students and college students.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm meeting less, I'm realizing less of those are true at the time. But I'm teaching public speaking, and most of the students came in with the idea that they would just be learning to speak in public, practicing speeches. So when I have them doing assignments to analyze a speech, to break down the rhetorical language, to write an essay about what they found regarding body language, they don't want to do any of the assignments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you get them back on board?
So the good news is if you started really hard, you can always loosen it up as the semester goes on. And I'd rather start hard and loosen up than try to start very loose and then tighten up, because that will never happen. But it sounds like their expectations aren't matching yours. It sounds like they can get a lot out of this just from the public speaking piece. And maybe it's a matter of explaining to them why you're having them do that analysis, and somehow demonstrating the value of that, because you have to show relevancy to them, right?
Yes, that's so important. I have learned that many students at first year especially need to know, how will this benefit them?
Right. And that's that job of that first year class too, right? Training them so that they do well in the rest of their academic career.
Mm-hmm. That's where you have to give them the ground. I feel like the ground level writing, analysis, rhetorical skills happens in that first year. And sometimes they get overwhelmed, and we have to find ways, which I'm not finding yet, to reel them back in and say, we care, we're here.
Yeah.
But yeah, the anxiety starts right there.
And that's going to be a very personal decision in terms of what level of support you're willing to give and are able to give. But it's also very rewarding, because some of the students that have the greatest difficulty, when you see them succeed, it's enormously personally rewarding.
It is. I agree. But yep, that's my current experience. So I'm really excited about this particular webinar, because as soon as you started with anxiety, I was like, I'm in the right webinar. I'll turn off my microphone now.
All right. So for the rest of the participants, if you can help out Mele, if you can toss her some suggestions about dealing with a first year course where the student expectations are lower than the faculty, and how can you get those students to kind of come up in speed. It sounds like everybody has a lot of things they can give. So give her a bit of advice, and we'll continue on with the webinar, and we'll see where we are in about 20 minutes, okay? All right. So some great comments. I don't think I have much to add to what people have said. It sounds like everybody's kind of knows what they're talking about, and that's probably why you're at this webinar. So let's move forward. I'm going to give you a few discussion protocols to use. I'm going to give you 4 small group protocols that you can use in small classes. Value line, human graph, expense account, role play, and brainstorming. I guess that's 5. And then I'm going to give you 2 discussion protocols that you could use in large classes. And that's Eric Mazur's peer instruction and Larry Michaelsen's team-based learning. You may have heard of a number of these, but hopefully I'll add something to your understanding. So let's start off with value line, otherwise known as line up. This is pretty easy. You have the students stand up and line up and sort themselves by whatever you want them to sort themselves by years of experience, by personal beliefs, by their particular stances, philosophical stances, oppositional stances, if you want to go that way. But they basically organize themselves into an order. So the person at the left is the strongest in support of the subject, maybe, and the person at the right is the least strong in terms of their support. The reason we're doing this is, 1, it gets all the students up. It gets them talking. It gets them talking to each other about their belief systems, and they start understanding each other, which will reduce the anxiety. But it also gives you a way to organize small groups. So you then count up the number of students you've got and divide that by 5 or however many students you want in each group. With this, we've got 7 people, so I'm going to get 2 groups. I'm going to have one group of 4 and one group of 3. And I'm going to have them count off. I'm going to have them count 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. And that will give me this heterogeneous group mix, so that I will have people from all ranges of that spectrum of belief in these independent groups, which will hopefully make those conversations richer and fuller and be able to address more of the issues involved. Now, the next one is the human graph, which is essentially, it's just 2 value lines. You have a value line going one way and you have a value line going another way. And then people are going to place themselves in that space just as if they were graphing their responses. And again, you have them talk about what are their beliefs and talk to their neighbors about how they feel about these different pieces. And then you use this image at the bottom, kind of shows you how you then use those quadrants to form new groups. It's a little more complex, but it depends on whether you need that or not. I tend to use value line a lot because it's a lot simpler. But human graph has worked from time to time. The third protocol is once you get them into those groups, you can use the expense account. And basically each person in the group gets 3 tokens. Pennies are the easiest to use for me. They're cheap, they're plentiful. Each time someone speaks, they put a token in the center of the table. And once you don't have any tokens left, you can't speak. So that means the people that are always talking, always assertive, they're going to run out of tokens very quickly. And the people that are quiet are not. And that means that different people are going to be able to have a chance to speak. All voices at the table will be heard from. Once everyone has put all of their tokens in, everybody can retrieve their tokens and start the process over. So this reduces anxiety basically in the sense of the fact that you're hearing all voices and you're not having a few people dominate. And I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak, even though, as Melee, you know, some people don't want to speak in public, and that makes them very anxious. So we do it in a small group, and we do it with a particular protocol. So there's an expectation. Another version would be role playing. And then basically what happens is the participants assume a role and speak with a voice other than their own. Now, this can be really good for the quiet students because it gives them a mask to hide behind. They can pretend to be somebody else. Their opinions are not their own, and it's something that gives them a bit more courage. The counterpoint to that is that everybody has to feel safe and relaxed enough to do this. So this is not something you would do in the first week. You do it maybe week 4 or after, because you have to have several class sessions where you build up some trust among the students themselves. I've seen this used in a number of ways. There was a psychology class that would use this for talking about specific theories and stances. So one person would be Sigmund Freud, one person would be Erik Erikson, another would be John Watson. And these people would be responsible for talking about their beliefs and having conversations between these historical characters, which was great. The issue, of course, is that can become very dynamic if they're actually role-playing a real person. And so, first of all, their preparation has to be very good. So you have to make sure they've done their research. Maybe they turn in a paper on that beforehand. But you also probably can teach them the rules of improvisational theater. And those are the 5 rules at the side. You can find these all over the web, so I don't need to talk about them very much. But they're basically rules that help you keep the improv moving forward. You don't stop the action. You don't deny. You always are accepting. And those rules of improv are also very good for reducing anxiety because it reduces the level of threat or risk to the people who are participating in this. I find role play very useful. It does take more time, but it can be a very rich experience. I've done it with the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. I had them play the delegates of the Second Continental Congress and talk about the Articles of Confederation. And I said, okay, let's see, 10 years down the line, we're going to have the Constitutional Convention. I want you now to take the delegates for the Constitutional Convention and see if the same person you played back in the Articles is now at the Constitution. And if they are, Why? Have their views changed? And if they're not, why and how do their views differ from the person who came before? And that was really useful. But again, it's a long amount of time that has to be dedicated to that. Brainstorming. I think everybody knows what brainstorming is, but I included it here because often it is just not done correctly in the work world. I've seen it, or in academia sometimes. The idea with the brainstorming, and brainstorming comes from the 50s, is that you get a group of people together and they start shouting out ideas to a particular issue, challenge, problem, whatever. One person writes those down on a blackboard, a whiteboard, a Google Doc, a Word doc, whatever. And no one is supposed to criticize or comment on any of the ideas being tossed out by the brainstorm, because your emphasis is on creativity and getting a lot of ideas out. Now, once those ideas are out, great, you can come back and you can start discussing the relative merits of each. You can start doing analysis on the issues. But the main place that this goes wrong is at the start with criticism. And it's not even overt criticism. It's usually there's a power differential in the room. And I've seen this mostly with, there's somebody's boss is in the room. That person is not going to contradict their boss in general. And so the boss's ideas will win. Everybody else will be a lot quieter, and you won't get the ideas out that you wanted to get out. So you have to be cognizant of that power differential. And training students for brainstorming in undergraduate is a way to make sure that they understand that once they go out to the work world. So hopefully make the work world better, right? Okay, large classes. Probably the best known method for teaching large classes is Eric Mazur's peer instruction. Eric teaches at Harvard, and he's done this for about 30 years. He teaches large lectures, and actually he does that very well. He's a skilled lecturer. He got high student evaluations for years, and he unfortunately then discovered that his students weren't learning as well as he had hoped they would learn. And so he had to come up with a different method. And the method he came up with is, he calls peer instruction. Basically, 4 or 5 times during a lecture, he'll present the students with a multiple choice question that tests their understanding of the concepts that are being addressed at that time. The students then talk to their neighbor, and they enter an answer with a student response system. And this gives them a way to check for student understanding that can inform the pace of the class. The possible responses you can get back are that most of them got the answer right. Great, they got it, we can move on. Most of them got it wrong. Okay, we have to stop and we have to go over that material again. Or there's confusion. There's 50% of them got it right, 50% of them got it wrong. Okay, and at that point, what he does, he sends them back to their partners or their groups, and he says, okay, talk about this amongst yourselves. Try to convince each other that you have the right answer, and then try it again. And this time, the answers will probably be more, either more have it right or more have it wrong, and we'll follow those protocols based on that. Okay, so this is a really good method for doing lectures in a way that makes them a little more active learning. The other method is one that Larry Michaelsen came up with called team-based learning. And actually, it wasn't in a class that looked anything like this. Larry started this back in the 80s, and it was all lecture halls. He had his students take an individual readiness assurance test, or an IRAT, which was basically just a quiz at the start of the class, which tested whether they had prepared for the class or not. Then as a group, they would collaborate on a GRAT, group readiness assurance test, and they would combine and be able to talk and say, what did you think of number 3? What did you get for this? And then give a response that way, and they would get a group grade for that. And then after that would come some clarification, where there's a discussion between the faculty member and the students, then application exercises where they worked as a team. Now, what Larry found about this that was very useful was the fact that during those GRAT sessions, students who were quieter and typically didn't speak up sometimes turned out to be very good at what was being discussed. And so the more assertive students, the ones that were always talking, would suddenly realize that they should listen a little bit more, because this student over here had really something valuable to give and would improve personally their grade if they listened to them. So it made some of the quieter students be more active members of the group. Now, the room that we're looking at here is more of a kind of a scale up room, so that they've replaced the lecture with movable chairs, movable tables. They've got them organized into groups. The groups are rather large. I mean, I see 7 or 8 people at a table, which to me would be too many. I would break that in half. But in the background, you can see the faculty member wandering from table to table, serving as a coach, not as a lecturer. And they've got the materials up on projector boards around the room. They've also got whiteboards for people to work on. So this is a pretty common way to do kind of innovative science instruction these days. All right, so let me stop there because I just covered a bunch. What questions do you have about face-to-face protocols? So Chris says they hated the expense account because they all love to talk. Well, that's a great problem. They probably don't have to use the expense account with that group.
Yeah, I mean, it was more that I feel like they felt like it was very artificial. You know, I think faculty really buy in often to the idea of, you know, this natural kind of conversation where the ideas kind of flow, and I think that's something that we need to kind of overcome in working with students, is that, you know, we recognize we have a lot of practice with discussion, and we've, you know, been through, many of us, a lot of schooling, go to conferences, and we're a lot more confident in the way we speak than our students typically are about academic content. And so again, I don't know that you need to use it for faculty sessions, but it actually was helpful because there always were people that kind of wouldn't speak because, you know, you had those who would dominate the conversation. So I think this could work at all levels of learning.
Yeah. And the other thing that I've run into is I've had faculty count off to form into groups, and some of them hated that. They felt it was too elementary school and they didn't want to do it. But on the other hand, there's a reason for that process. I wanted to randomize the groups. I wanted them to meet people they didn't normally speak with. So yeah, you're going to have to look at, there may be resistance to that when we're doing these kinds of things with faculty, but I think most faculty actually enjoy it. It's fun for most of them. It gets them out of their silos. Did anybody else have any questions about the face-to-face protocols?
I don't see any in the chat.
Okay.
Does anybody want to chime in?
Doing my 10-second count here. Okay. Melee, everybody hates teamwork. Everybody hates it. So they do need training. And I'd go further than that they'll need it during their collegiate experience. I'd say they're going to need it in the work environment, and that it helps them work with other individuals out there once they're in jobs, or if they're in jobs, it helps them in their professional lives. Good. That's great to hear. Okay. So I'm going to take a couple minutes here and talk about online routines because we're dealing now with this issue with COVID-19, and we're all going to be doing a lot more either online or distance learning or something in the next few weeks. So these are just some of my ideas. You may have your own, but these are the ones I tend to use. First of all, I say that it's probably useful to have a routine for when work is done. The typical format from talking to a number of people that do this sort of thing is that the initial post is due on Wednesday night, follow-up posts by Sunday. In Canvas, this is easy to do because you have 2 due dates on a particular assignment. In Blackboard, you're going to need to make 2 discussion forums to ensure that that happens. The deadline for the initial post should be firm because the rest of the class has got to reply. And definitely get rid of post 1, reply 3 if possible. That is the bane of my existence in discussion forums, is people have that in every class and it gets boring. And people, because they may not have enough to say, will say just stuff to fill in the blanks. And so I would suggest saying post 1, reply often. So build these moderately high expectations of student participation earlier in the course, eliminate the busy work and kind of get them working and thinking as if this was a useful thing for them to do. If you're lecturing, keep your videos short, 10 minutes, no more, and ensure that the closed captioning is accurate. Don't just use the automatic captioning in YouTube. And use Flipgrid or VoiceThread for video responses. Flipgrid is free, VoiceThread is not. If you haven't used Flipgrid, definitely go out and check it out, because everybody I've had use it loves it. So a way to do video responses to each other. For fully online classes, I'm not going to really deal with this because most of us are not fully online at this point, but use triangles or 3 people for synchronous discussions. It's just really hard to schedule otherwise. If you've gone to a WebEx solution and you're going to have classes at the same time they would have been on campus, okay, they've already scheduled those, so you're good to go there and you can have multiple people. But if not, then try to keep it to 3 people for a synchronous discussion. And I usually go with pentads for asynchronous discussion, just because that way it's an odd number of people, you can resolve issues, and everybody gets a chance to talk a little bit more. The other stuff you can read as we go on. Last thing, just to reiterate, good ideas for all classes. Use frequent low-stakes assessments rather than a few high-stakes assessments. Assign a large proportion of the grades to the preparation for the class rather than to the tests. Again, that helps the students keep up to date on what they're supposed to be doing. Establish a low bar for a base grade in participation. If you do the work, you get the grade, basically because you know they're going to have large assignments that they're not going to do as well on. So it's good that they feel good about the participation at least, and it gets them to show, which is important. Assign moderately challenging work. Moderate challenge is the idea of Vygotsky's zone of proximal distance. That the idea is that you keep them working just hard enough that they feel they can succeed, but that it's a little challenging and they have to work at it. That's the real sweet spot, and that's different for every course and every instructor, every student. Use ungraded assessments. So get Angelo and Cross's Classroom Assessment Techniques book. Use that. That's one of my Bibles. And then be a coach more than a judge in your discussions. Facilitate conversations rather than impose them on others. I think that's it. Yeah. So we've covered reducing student anxiety. We've talked about scaffolding support for students according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We talked a little bit about underrepresented populations. We had a spokesperson exercise that you all did with flying colors, so I didn't see any issues there. You're all on top of it. And then we talked about some of the small group discussions, and I gave a couple tips about student anxiety online and how you might reduce that. Now, all of these materials are available at this tiny URL, along with a number of articles that you can access if you're at SUNY Cortland. If you're not, you at least have the full citation and can get them from there. If you have any other questions, please ask them now. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Don't see any in the chat. There was a little bit of comments in the chat, Deacon.
Okay.
I actually,
mics and
yeah, if people want to open up mics, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, comments, questions.
I'm actually curious what folks think about your suggestions about online discussions.
Yep.
To see if anybody else has any questions or thoughts, because I do think that that's something a lot of people are going to be experimenting with over the next few weeks and months.
Yes, they are.
I have a question.
Yes,
Oh.
go ahead.
Oh, somebody else started talking. I don't want to interrupt.
Okay, I'll wait.
Okay.
Go for it.
So one of the things I thought we were going to talk about a little bit was sort of how to stimulate discussions, which, because I feel like this is kind of more methods as opposed to maybe, I don't know, topics. I went to a seminar maybe 2 years ago where they talked about, I can't remember what they call them, like great questions or big questions or something like that, which I thought was really useful. Like I used that in one of my classes to kind of get people talking about, you know, sort of like, what do you think about X, you know, and everybody has an opinion, and it was related, but not like super, there was no right answer. Okay.
All right.
So that's kind of, I mean, I was sort of hoping to come away with maybe a little bit more, sort of like how, you know, especially that idea about inclusion and trust. Like, I feel like, that's, even in my in-person classes, I feel like students are so cautious. They feel so judged. They don't want to, volunteer anything. They're so, that whole thing about anxiety, like they're so nervous, and they know each other. I mean, they're not complete strangers when they come to my class.
So I do have a suggestion for you. That, back in the 90s, that big question idea would be easy, and you'd save those big questions for your in-class conversations because you didn't want to steal the heat. Nowadays, students are on their smartphones all the time, and I think that they don't have the social confidence in face-to-face settings. They also are in this post 9/11 atmosphere where they don't want to express disagreement. They don't like that. And so what I found is really useful is doing an online discussion forum as a warm-up. They are very used to online conversations. And I found that if I do an online conversation that's either parallel or leading up to the in-class conversation, that they will be more ready to talk once they get to class because they've already normed themselves out in an online setting. This is something I never would have done 20 years ago because I'd end up with an in-class conversation that was completely dead because they'd already talked about it. Now, when I do it, it actually increases the level of conversation.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
I want to follow up on that. One of the things that I actually have done successfully is pull up a shared Google Doc in the classroom.
Yep.
And everyone has their laptops out or their personal device out, and the conversation gets started right there on that Google Doc.
Right.
The students can share links. They can share different articles that they've read. So it gives them a place to find something to share and talk about, and then it's saved. So students can later go back another day or another week and go, oh, that's right, we talked about this. So that's just one thing I have done that's worked.
I think that's great. And I know my daughter, who is a student currently, she does the same thing. So they have shared notes on Google Docs, that sort of piece. The only thing you have to watch out for is Google Docs or a wiki, which means if somebody gets in there and removes stuff, it's gone. So that's the only downside.
There is a catch for that. You can go back to every single edit. There's a little tiny, barely noticeable, all edits up near the top middle.
Yep.
And it'll show you every edit that's been made for the life of the document. So that's there.
Yep.
But that is
it's a great tool though, and students come out of high school knowing a lot about the Google suite of apps, so that becomes a very familiar thing for most of them.
I want to thank you so much for this conversation. I'm going to have to get off now because I'm driving. But
okay. Yes, you should be off the phone now.
And you're on Bluetooth, but I look forward to the shared PowerPoint and being able to really digest what you've gone through here.
All right, thank you. Take care.
Aloha.
Yeah, Dakin, I actually do have my students in my online class that I teach every fall. They have online discussions where they are required to post 7 times, 3 top posts, 4 replies. And again, it's not every week though. It's typically for 4 of the modules. So there's 4 content discussions, and then the first couple of weeks of class there are 2 discussions just to get them used to kind of engaging with each other. So there's 6 total over the semester. So
Chris, that
every other week.
All of these rules are not really rules. They're guidelines, and they're going to change based on what your students are doing, what you're doing, what the content's doing. So.
Yeah, I think I've experimented with other ways of doing it where it's a little bit more open-ended and authentic. And the reason I keep coming back to the post 3 times, reply 4 times is that students really, when I did it when I was a little bit more kind of open-ended, there's just a lot of frustration on their part with what is expected for the grade that they want. And so it really is just that sort of pressure to kind of be very transparent about how they're going to be evaluated in the discussions. And I used to use rubrics to look more at the quality of the discussions, and I would give them feedback about, not necessarily just the number of times they posted, but what they were posting. And now I don't do that necessarily with the grade. Now I do that when I'll jump in and I'll reply to students. I'll ask them to expand upon something they're talking about in the moment, and rather than sort of tie that into the grade. And so it really is for me just a practical thing, and not necessarily something that I feel like is the best way to do it. So I'm always thinking about how could I do it differently? How could I get them to engage with other students and not just worry about what, their own posts if I don't do that.
Yeah. Now I love doing jigsaw exercises or role playing, and I find those are really appealing in a lot of different ways. I can make that work in a lot of sense. But this is when I'm teaching usually history, or I'm teaching something in professional school that has a set of particular skills that one is supposed to be practicing.
Hi all, this is Robin. I have a question.
Hi, Robin.
Thanks for the session. It was really very helpful. And I noticed in the chat that one of the participants' EHD work study had said that they use some alternatives to discussions, such as Google Sheets and Padlet. I'm wondering if they could elaborate on that, or if anyone else has other alternatives to traditional kind of discussion forum discussion.
Right, and we should
options.
mention that Robin, of course, has the MTech resources that we all direct our faculty towards. So thank you, Robin.
Thank you. Thanks.
So EHD work study?
Yes, hi, this is me. I'm Jaja from Broadport. So how I did was I logged into the Padlet website and then just post prompting questions there and put the link into my Blackboard site. So the students don't need to go to the Padlet directly. They can come to my Blackboard and then click the link, and it will link them to Padlet, and then they talk collectively about a certain topic, such as if we were talking about formative assessment, then they can post 2 different formative assessments, post some pros and cons. Or if we are talking about alternative assessments, they can talk about share like portfolio assessments or authentic assessments, etc. So at the end, once everybody participated, they can get the Padlet as a kind of collective toolbox for them to keep, so that they can go back to refer it later. So
Right.
this is the way how I use Padlet.
That's great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deacon, also for mentioning about the MTech site. I'm going to just put the link in the chat so people can check that out. But one thing I'm doing, and I was going to be putting a post into Workplace soon, I want to try to highlight some of the basic, really go-to tools, and Padlet would certainly be one of them. So I'm actually right now creating a category on the site for essential tools. And I'd be curious if there's some others that might fall in the discussion area that might be something that they, that should be highlighted.
Great. Well, I'm going to type a couple in there myself.
Definitely. And actually, Zoom gave premium access to campuses who asked for it for the COVID situation, campuses that are affected by COVID.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I already have a paid subscription, so. But that's
Your
good.
faculty might appreciate it. Yeah.
The problem is our campus doesn't support Zoom.
That's
so
always a
we have
topic.
WebEx.
Yeah. Screencast-O-Matic is great too. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, good. Anybody else?
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Dakin. So I'm just gonna say, like I said, the recording for this session will be posted in our workplace faculty development community of practice group. We also have a YouTube playlist of all our faculty development related webinars from the CPD. So I just put the YouTube link there. And this goes back, we've been trying to catalog all of our webinars over the years. So it goes back a couple of years. And so if you go there, you'll see a number of sort of faculty development, teaching and learning related webinars that we've had over the last, like I said, 2 or 3 years. Yeah, and I'll probably get that up there hopefully before the end of the day. So good luck, everybody, with all the challenges right now on your campuses, and wash your hands. Don't touch your face, right?
Thanks, Chris.
All right. Thanks, Dakin.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care, everyone.